This is about something that happened to me a long time ago, and I am now a much older and wiser woman. I was 20 and had moved from northwest England to live and work in London. I had no real experience of relationships. On the outside, I appeared to be an extrovert and quite a toughie. On the inside, I had no self-confidence. I looked in the mirror and all I could see was a fat, ugly, aggressive, and unlikable person. I now see that none of that was true, but it meant I was vulnerable. I met a man, Robert, 27 years old. We dated, and 6 months later, I moved into his flat. There were loads of red flags, which I stupidly ignored until I was living in a nightmare. It started with control and emotional abuse. Now, I grew up in a rough area of a city in northwest England, so I could handle myself and had a quick temper, so at the beginning, I gave as good as I got. But it escalated to him cheating on me, physically assaulting me, locking me in the flat, isolating me, mind games, and taking my money. There were too many incidents to write about here, but suffice to say, in that 12-month relationship, he terrorized me until I hardly recognized myself. I was desperate to escape, but deep down, I always knew that when I left him, I would be in danger, so I kept putting it off. One day, he started another fight, but this time, he told me to get out. I didn't need telling twice. I packed my stuff and was gone within 10 minutes. I had no close friends because he would be so vile that nobody stayed around for long. I rang a girl I used to work with and begged her to let me stay with her for the night. She gave me her address, and she let me stay with her for a month in her flat, which was about a mile from his flat in northwest London. This meant that I had to use the same tube station to get to work. It started one morning when he was waiting at the tube station. I heard the words, "You f***ing slag," and I ran through the morning rush hour crowd to the train with my heart pounding. He escalated it from that point onwards. He would be at the tube station waiting for me a couple of times a week. He would stand behind me as I got my ticket and would verbally abuse me. He would never shout or draw attention to himself, but he would call me names and threaten me in a low tone of voice that made my stomach heave. I never reacted because I knew that that was what he wanted. I foolishly hoped he would get fed up and leave me alone. Then he started to show up in the neighborhood around my workplace in West London. I told my manager and colleagues, but this was before mobile phones were commonly used. Other than keeping an eye out for him, they couldn't really do much to help me. Sometimes I would see him at a distance standing on a corner, or catch a glimpse of him in the local market, and then he would vanish. I thought I was going mad or developing paranoia. I moved out of my friend's flat into a shared house about 1.5 miles away from him. I didn't know any other areas of London, and I had made some friends in the area, so I didn't want to leave the area completely. I used the same tube station, and as I stopped seeing him there, I thought he was starting to move on. It took me a couple of weeks to notice that a white van with blacked out windows was permanently parked across the road from my flat. I thought it belonged to a neighbor. I was horrified when I realized it was him, and he would sit in that van day and night, watching me and tracking my movements. One day, soon after the van appeared, he approached one of my housemates to give me a message and asked for the house telephone number. I wasn't that friendly with my housemates, so I hadn't told them what was going on. They thought he was a friend and gave him the number. From then on, he rang every night, all through the night. Eventually, I told my housemates what was happening, and they promised not to let him in and unplugged the phone at night. He started to leave gifts and cards on the doorstep. My room was on the ground floor, and a brick was thrown through my window. I'm phobic about birds, and I keep finding dead birds on my windowsill. I was a nervous wreck, flinching at shadows and jumping at the slightest sound. I thought about moving again, but I knew he would find me through my workplace. I went to the police, who said because he hadn't actually done anything, then there was nothing they could do. This was before stalking was a criminal offence in the UK. I would come home and find typed letters posted through the door asking me why I had been to a certain shop or cafe or theatre on a certain day or night. The letters would ask me why I had visited a certain address and who lived there. It was relentless, and I knew he was letting me know that he was there watching me all the time. I wanted to leave London and go back home, but I couldn't tell my family what was happening, as my mother was seriously ill, and I didn't want to worry my dad and my siblings, as they had enough to deal with. In desperation, I decided to pretend that I had left London by packing a couple of suitcases and taking them back to my home city. I knew he would be watching me, and I hoped he would be fooled. I totally underestimated his lunacy. I would stay at my best mate's house when I returned home. I thought I saw him once, but I thought I was being paranoid. The night after I arrived, I went out for a couple of drinks with my best friend Diane and two other friends, Billy and John. We went to a couple of bars, listened to some music, then all ended up back at her house for drinking and chatting. Billy and John left around 3 a.m. A couple of days later, I returned to London. There was a note waiting for me on the doormat. I opened it, and to my horror, it contained details of my night out, along with threats about what would happen to me for being a cheating bitch. It mentioned John, it named bars where I had drank, and even the name of the band. Then he rang the house phone, screaming and ranting words that made no sense. I saw one of his friends, who told me that, unbeknown to me, the crazy ex had driven 200 miles and gone straight to my best friend's house. He had watched me go out and waited for me to return from the night out. Then he followed John home and waited outside his house too. The following day, when John went to his local pub for a Sunday afternoon drink, the maniac ex followed John in there and made a point of chatting to him to find out his name, etc. This had gone on for 4 months at this point. About a month later, I was on my way home from work. It was winter, around 7 p.m, and the streets were dark. He grabbed me on a side street and dragged me into the back of the van. I was petrified and crying in the dark in the van, being thrown from side to side. All I could hear was the radio. He hadn't said a word. After about an hour, the van stopped and the back door opened, and I was in an empty car park with trees around it. He kept his hand on the back of my neck as he made me walk for about 20 minutes through what I had guessed was a forest. He never said a word, and I asked him where we were going and why he was doing this. It was as though he was deaf because he didn't even acknowledge what I was saying. The night was freezing and there were no lights other than his torch. I don't know how many times I fell over and got dragged back up to my feet. Eventually, we reached a sort of clearing, and he pulled me behind a tree with a stick and a plastic bag tied to it. He then showed me a shallow rectangular hole in the ground and said that was my grave, and he would happily go to prison knowing I was dead because of all the pain I had caused him. He pulled a short, thin rope from his pocket, and at that point, he looked unrecognizable. His expression was pure darkness, and all I could see in his eyes was crazy and staring right through me. He had his hand on my throat and the rope in his other hand. I swear I've never been so scared in my life. I was shaking with terror. I honestly thought that forest clearing would be the last place I would ever see in this world. Suddenly, I knew with complete certainty that I had to stay calm if I was to get out of this alive. I told him he didn't need to do this, that I knew I was wrong to make him mad. It was all my fault and I was sorry. I told him we could get back together and I knew that he really loved me. In the end, God knows how, but somehow I got through to him and his eyes cleared and he spoke to me. He agreed to let me go and get my things to move back in with him. He drove me back to my flat, and I ran inside and collapsed on the floor while he waited outside. He started beeping his horn, banging on the door, and ranting and raving outside the house. My housemate rang the police, but he left as they arrived in the street. I gave them his details and told them what had happened. He denied everything, and the police said that there were no witnesses, so it was my word against his. The police told me they had warned him, but ultimately they couldn't do anything without proof. I gave them the notes he had left, the van registration, the names of people who could verify what I was saying, but still, they said it wasn't enough to arrest him and charge him. They checked the van registration, but it wasn't registered in his name. And so, the stalking and harassment continued. I started carrying a personal alarm, hairspray, a screwdriver, and anything else I thought might protect me. I hadn't slept properly for weeks, and food stuck in my throat if I tried to eat. I was a shadow of my normal self. Friends of his came to see me to tell me to leave London, as he was obsessed with revenge because I had been to the police. I went to a solicitor who wrote a cease and desist letter. I found parts of it ripped on my doorstep. About 6 months from the start of his terror campaign, I was asked out on a date by Gary, who was a friend of my friend's boyfriend, Pete. I was trying to convince myself that I could carry on living with some semblance of normality. I agreed to go out with Gary if Pete came along too. After a few drinks, we went to a club. Pete, who wasn't drinking, said he would give us a lift home. We were in Pete's car, and he started the engine and drove for about 5 minutes. Then I hear Pete say, "There's something wrong with my brakes." Then he said, "There's a white van following us." My heart started beating 100 miles an hour, and my throat started to close as I asked him what the registration number was. To my horror, it was him following us. I quickly had to explain to Pete and Gary that I had a lunatic ex-boyfriend who just happened to be stalking me right at that very moment. Pete was only driving about 20 miles an hour, remember the brakes. He pulled the car over, and we jumped out and ran through a housing estate until we lost him. We found a minicab office, and as I was too scared to go back to my flat, I ended up sleeping on Gary's couch. Unsurprisingly, the potential new relationship ended that night. The next day, Gary rang me to say they had been back to pick up his car, and the brake cable had been partially cut until it was nearly severed. I truly believe he tried to kill all 3 of us that night. Gary and Pete wanted me to go to the police, but I had lost all faith in them. Every time I had asked the police to help me, they had done nothing, and it just made things worse by reinforcing how powerless I was. Enough was enough. I knew he wasn't going to stop. I didn't even know what he wanted anymore. That same week, I gave notice on my flat and handed in my notice at work. I booked a 6-month air ticket to India, as in my crazy mind, I thought, well, it's one of the most populated places on the planet, so he will never find me there. I traveled around India on my own for 6 months. I did a lot of thinking and healing and returned to my home city. I never returned to London, and thank God, I never saw him again. So crazy mad wannabe murderer Stalker X, if you're reading this, let's not meet again. This takes place over the course of a few years, from just before my university freshman year to my junior year. I'm a 20-year-old female, but at the start of this story, I was 17. For my freshman orientation, my family and I were staying in a hotel across from my college campus. Orientation started in the morning, so I wandered over to the campus with my luggage to check into my dorm room for the next few days. I was roomed alone for orientation since I have OCD and sleeping problems and didn't want to bother any potential roommates, so I put my luggage away and began walking the campus. This entire fiasco started for one reason. I wanted breakfast. It was foggy that morning, and I had never been on campus. It was a ways away from my hometown, so I quickly became turned around. I spotted a group of 4 people walking towards a building, so I swallowed my anxiety and approached them to ask for directions. I should add that I'm a shy and quiet person, so it took a bit before I piped up and excused me. One of the 4 turned around, and my immediate thought was, oh my god, this guy looks like a fish. He had big, creepy eyes and fat lips. He was blonde and a little chubby. This is purely for descriptive purposes. I am by no means a model. Still, I stifled my gawking and asked, do you know where the dining hall is? Oh, yeah, it's right here. He motioned to the building directly behind us. Oh, wow, I'm dumb, I laughed. There was a small pause before he asked, are you alone? As someone who has run into predatory people before, this question never, ever sits well with me. My family will be here later. We all have sleeping problems, so they're catching up on sleep. They'll be here at 6. This wasn't a lie, but I hoped it would deter him from latching onto me. Oh, well, do you want to sit with us? I guessed that meant the group of 4 he was in, but the other 3 had already disappeared into the dining hall. Sure, I conceded. He immediately grabbed a 2-person table, which made me internally groan. I had a feeling of where this was going, and I wanted no part of it. I'm a lesbian, for Christ's sake. I didn't want to risk making him angry. I didn't want someone to hate me before the school year even started. So I sat down with him and a plate of eggs. I tried to make conversation, but he kept replying dryly with things like, oh, uh-huh, and mm-hmm. I thought that I had upset his fish face, so I looked up from my plate to see him staring directly at my chest. I'm a 36 DD, so I'm unfortunately used to this. I sighed and bagged out my sweater around my chest. Even after this, and me slouching, he just kept staring. After this, I didn't want anything to do with him, but I wasn't so lucky. Everywhere I went, he followed, even if our orientation events were separate. I repeatedly tried to slip away from him, becoming increasingly creeped out by his attempts of flirting, but everywhere I went, there was fish face. I gave it one last try, slipping away to the library. That's when the messages started. Somehow, Fishface found my Snapchat. I guessed that he searched my name. He kept messaging things like, where are you? Where did you go? I'm at X location. Knowing that he could see that I'd read them, I felt obligated to respond. Okay, I'll be there soon. This didn't stop with orientation. The beginning of my freshman year was marred with Fishface encounters. Classes, trips to the store, student activities. It didn't matter. He was there, shadowing me. The constant messaging drove me to just delete my Snapchat. Thank Christ he never got my phone number. At this point, Fishface was incessantly hitting on me and reminding me of how much he liked me, despite numerous times of me stating that I'm not interested. When I made myself clear, it seemed to make him push harder, as if he thought I was playing games with him. It became more and more common for him to try and put his arm around me, or try to hold my hand. This is where I drew the line. I told him, clear as day, I'm not interested in you. I do not like men. Do not touch me. He pouted, but relented, in touching me at least. The shadowing only got worse, to the point that I couldn't leave without my roommate. I became more exhausted, paranoid, and felt like he was a time bomb waiting to blow. After weeks of this, weeks of sheer anxiety, I spoke to a priest at my university. The father was deeply concerned, and went as far as to walk me back to my dorm. He made me promise that I would speak to security first thing the next day, which I agreed to. Security's first question was if I was really being stalked, or if my anxiety made me believe that I was being stalked. When I cited the witnesses to his shadowing me, that was dropped. Then the question was I clear enough with him? I don't know how much clearer I could have been. After much back and forth, I managed to get a no-contact order against Fishface. I knew that a no-contact order only meant that he couldn't contact me, and vice versa, rather than physically keeping him away from me. I was okay with this because at this point, I did not want to hurt this guy or potentially impact his future. For the remainder of the year, there were no more attempts to contact me or be near me. I thought that would be the end of it, but then came sophomore year. I could never be sure if it was a coincidence or he was actually tailing me, but then he started appearing outside of every classroom door, every coffee place, absolutely everywhere. I was in a rough place this year, totally unrelated to this, but it certainly didn't help. But due to the sheer emotional exhaustion I was battling, I couldn't give a damn. Okay, follow me. I promise that I'm not interesting. But this is when I learned of the other victims. Their stories were identical to mine. 6 of them, mine being the 7th. They ran into Fishface, a totally innocent encounter, but then he started in on them, bombarding them with messages, following them, groping them, and trying to get them alone. I was horrified to find that every one of these other girls had reported him to university security. Every one of them was prescribed a no-contact order. 7 victims later, and this bastard was still on campus as if nothing happened. I learned that this was not uncommon for our university, on top of victim blaming. The more I learned, the more deeply my fear ran. It was open season, and these bastards had full protection. We could not do a thing to get guys like Fishface off of our campus, and so I resigned myself to being followed by this guy. Junior year came around, and initially, it seemed that Fishface had given up. I could not have been more wrong. It was pointed out to me by friends who knew about the stalking that he was in the background of my every move. Throughout the year, he got closer and closer, until it became worse than I'd ever dealt with before. I was a member of campus conservation lists, and we were selling reusable grocery bags in lieu of our state banning plastic bags. And then, after about 45 minutes of peace, I glanced to my right. He was there, just around the corner, staring directly at me. Ice-cold fear ran down my spine, and my stomach dropped. I tore my gaze away and tried to hide my panic. He hadn't been this close to me since freshman year. There was no mistaking it. He was here for me and me alone. I texted my girlfriend, letting her know what was happening. I will be honest and say that the rest is a blur. I was too panicked to remember how we got back to my dorm safely. I thank God every day for my ultra-protective girlfriend. Just 2 days after that, he appeared in the hallway outside my class. It was just reaching the end, and I was ready to call it a day. I glanced at my watch. It was 2:45. I wandered to the bathroom, ignoring Fishface lurking in the corner. I did my business and approached the door. It began to open, so I called out, "Oh, I got it," and opened it for the next person. Fishface. I felt my face go pale and my breath hitch. He stared directly at me with those creepy-ass blue eyes. His giant floppy lips pulled into a small smirk before he turned and disappeared down the hall. My heart thumped in my chest as I re-entered the classroom. I felt myself shaking trying to hide it. All that kept running through my head was, what was he doing? Why was he trying to get in the bathroom? I glanced down at my watch again and knew that I didn't have time to wait for my girlfriend, as the class was minutes away from ending. I asked the girl next to me to walk with me to the next class. She agreed without hesitation. She was a really sweet girl to begin with, and thank God for that. I finished my final class for the day and sped back to my dorm. I didn't get much sleep that night. I reported the incidences to security the next morning. I was met with the same pressing questions and doubts. I threw everything I had at them and asked them to watch the security cameras outside of my classroom to see him attempt to corner me in the bathroom. I had to threaten to contact state police before they relented and promised to investigate my claims. They informed me that no action would be taken. They said that they could find no evidence of the incidences. When questioned, Fishface said that him appearing around my classrooms and frequented spots around campus was purely coincidental, and he felt, quote, so awkward that he was going through this again. I took my second semester of junior year off for unrelated reasons, yet I'm relieved to not be on campus with that creep. He's still there. The other victims have mostly transferred to other universities due to the college's general mistreatment and poor administration. I started my senior year this August at the same university. I don't know what's going to happen. I don't know if he's going to step his game up. I listened to enough true crime to know what could happen. It scares me like few things have. So Fishface, let's not meet again. Update. Fishface is gone. He flunked out, thank God. I finally feel like I'm safe here, and it's a welcome relief. I'm disappointed that he wasn't expelled for all his BS, but as long as he's gone, I feel okay. I hope anyone else in this situation can take something helpful from my experience and never hesitate to reach out for help. As a teenager, I had quite severe mental health issues which landed me in a few psychiatric hospitals. Some patients had very overt symptoms of various disorders, whereas for others, it was harder to tell exactly why they were in there. One girl in particular, Jess, was someone I really admired. She was older by a few years, 18 to my 15, and represented to me the kind of cool, trendy, laid-back adolescent I wish I could be. I really wanted to be friends with her, and was really happy when she took a liking to me. We started hanging out with each other every day on the ward, and still, after months, I had no idea what was wrong with her. One day, I just came out and asked her. I was worried she'd be mad, but she wasn't. She said she was scared to tell me, but that she had had a relationship with a female teacher who was apparently married at the time to a man, and, to save her reputation, the teacher claimed Jess had been harassing her. She said that they had been in love, and when she insisted this to be the case, she was removed from the school and placed in a hospital. In my 15-year-old brain, this didn't sound too far-fetched. I felt like I knew Jess well enough at this point, and she hadn't behaved in any atypical way around me. I also had a lot of resentment at being there myself, so it wasn't a great cognitive leap for me to believe the hospital staff, aka adults, hadn't done thorough research, and had just assumed she was delusional. She told me that although she was hurt and still had feelings for this person, she was slowly but surely getting over it. I apologized for asking, and we moved on. Eventually, we were discharged from the psychiatric hospital. Jess left a month or so before me, but we kept in contact. When I got out, we met up and she asked me if I wanted to attend a concert with her. I hadn't heard of the band, but I figured if she liked it, it would be worth seeing. I asked for more information so that I knew where I was going, but she just asked me to meet her at a nearby station that Saturday, and she'd lead us from there. Again, I trusted her. We arrived at a huge stadium, which seemed to be holding some sort of event. I was confused, because the band were largely unknown, and I had anticipated a dive bar or small independent venue. It was also really early for this much activity inside and out. someone working at the event handed me a flyer which explained exactly what we had come to. It was a seminar conducted by a particular denomination of Christianity. Lots of shouting, lots of, quote, healing, etc. It seemed like something run by a modern-day Jim Jones. I was mad, but also really confused. I asked Jess what was going on, and, at first, she skirted around my questions. Eventually, she admitted that she believed her teacher would be attending this event, and she wanted to confront her about lying to the police and to the school. She insisted this was the last time she would be making any contact with her, and had decided it should be in public so that there would be people around to witness it. I'm not sure why she asked me to come along, and I didn't ask. However, I did ask why she believed this teacher would be at this event, to which she had revealed that she had driven past the teacher's house and found the flyer in her letterbox. I was completely shocked. I started to realize that maybe none of what Jess perceived to be true, regardless of how sure and persuasive she seemed, was grounded in reality. I was also really nervous, as I didn't want to make her angry or defensive. So I explained that it wasn't my thing and I needed to leave. She decided to stay, with the intention of searching every row of chairs to find this woman. Impossible with the size of the venue. Jess tried to reach out to me after that day, sending pictures, messages, and videos, but I ignored them. I was scared of her, of what she could be capable of doing, and worried this obsession she had for her teacher would somehow translate to me. Eventually, she gave up, and we never communicated again, but I still wonder what she's doing from time to time. This story takes place when I was around 16 or 17 years old. I lived with my dad in a little apartment in a questionable area. It was the type of area you would not want to be out and about in when the sun goes down. Up until a certain time, like 10 to 11 p.m, there would be a cop or two in the area patrolling and making sure that there are no gang-related activities going on. I had a job at a restaurant in the city, which was about a 30-minute car ride and an hour-and-a-half train ride. The train was a couple of blocks away from my place, and since my dad was always too lazy or hungover to drive me, that was my main form of transportation. I went to work around 3 p.m. and would usually get home around 12 or 1 a.m. This was my schedule 4 days a week, aside from having school. I would see a lot of familiar faces on the train because of this, but we never really made conversation with each other. Until one night, when I got out of work late because some assholes wanted to sit in the restaurant past closing. Thanks to them, I missed my train. The next one wasn't scheduled to arrive for another hour. So, having nowhere to go and no money for Lyft or Uber, I sat there waiting. No one was around me, so when this older man showed up, kind of staggering a bit, I assumed he was another drunken hobo in the city, trying to catch a train to sleep in. Something about his face gave me deja vu, but I shrugged it off, thinking maybe I've just seen him on the train here and there. He made his way over to me, much to my discomfort, and started up a conversation. He wasn't slurring, but the way he was looking down at me gave me goosebumps. He asked me why I was out there so late, all by myself. I had to reply as to not anger him. I mean, we were alone, and he was close enough to me to pull out a knife or something. Anyway, I told him I was waiting for the train, and he asked which one. Now, the train was color-coded, with a strip at the bottom to indicate whether it goes to the north, south, east or west areas. I took blue, but I lied and said I took green. He looked at the schedule above the benches and saw that the green train was coming in 15 minutes, so he said he'd keep me company. For those extremely long 15 minutes, He asked me how long I had been working at So-So Restaurant. This made my blood run ice cold. I never told him where I worked. I just looked at him and very timidly answered, "For a year?" And he laughed. He said, "Wow, it's already been a whole year, huh?" At this point, my skin was itching out of anxiety, and as soon as the green train came, I knew I had no choice but to take it. I said goodbye to him and thanked him for the chat, hoping that would be the end of it. Nope. He suddenly told me that he took the green train too, so he followed me on and sat in the seat behind me. My mind was racing about whether he was going to try to do something to me, like chloroform me or hurt me some other way, but we rode the train in silence. I was trying to figure out how I was going to lose him. There weren't many people riding the train at that hour. Our car was empty, unfortunately. As the ride went on in menacing silence, I could feel him staring down the back of my head. I waited until we got to a stop where there was another person, and I was so relieved to see a woman sitting there. She wasn't boarding, so I immediately got off the train, and the man followed me as expected. I took a seat on a bench next to hers, close enough for her to see and hear everything going on, hoping she would catch on. The man noticed I was shivering, which was allergies and being out in the cold, and asked if I was sick. I told him no, but he insisted on giving me these weird pills he had that was supposedly cold medicine. I declined in a louder voice. "Sorry, I don't accept pills from strangers." This prompted the lady to look at us, and I made eye contact with her. She knew now. Now, this went on until a blue train came, and the lady got up, giving me a look that told me to get on with her. So without explanation, I did. She waved me over to sit next to her, and when the man tried to follow, she said, "No, you go sit over there," and made him sit a couple of seats across from us. He chose the one where he could face us and stared at me the entire time. I was shaking and about to burst into tears. The woman leaned over and whispered to me that she had a pistol. I felt safer with her there. We whispered back and forth about what happened. I told her where I lived and how I was worried he would follow me home. She told me a friend of hers would be boarding the train soon, and when he did, she told me his name was Ray. Ray was filled in about everything and agreed to escort me home. She promised me that I could trust him. The two of them waited with me until I got to my stop. The man, still watching me, started to smile widely, resembling the Cheshire Cat. He shouted, "This is your place, right?" To which I didn't respond and just gave the woman a hug and thanked her. Ray and I hurriedly hopped off the train, and as I looked back, I saw that the woman had pulled out her pistol and told the man to sit back down, even blocking the exit with her body. I finally let myself cry in relief. Ray walked me home and tried to calm me down by telling me about his job and his family. After watching me get inside the gates of my apartment safely, I thanked him profusely for his help. It gives me chills to think about how that night would have turned out if I hadn't met with that woman and her friend. I feel extremely lucky to this day. I never saw that man again, and eventually stopped thinking about him, but in the back of my head, that creepy, aroused smile of his was burned into my mind, and I couldn't help but wonder just what else he knew about me. I'm really writing this out as a way to vent, because I'm in a situation where I feel really stuck. Any advice is appreciated, but I'm not sure there's anything that could be said that will actually help. I've tried just about everything. I'm going to start from the beginning. This story is 2 years in the making, so I'll try to be as thorough as possible. In 2019, I graduated with my master's degree and moved to a relatively rural area for my PhD, thinking we'd make an investment. My dad and I purchased a house. The intention was to rent it out once I completed my PhD. This house was only a block away from a dive bar where my dad was able to make some pretty good friends. He introduced me to everyone, and everyone let me know that I would be so happy in my new house, because my next door neighbor was the absolute nicest guy you could ever meet. So we met the neighbor, and he did seem nice enough. He suggested we exchange numbers just in case I ever needed anything, and I thought that was a good idea. What's the worst that could happen? A few days later, my dad left to go back to his home in another state, and I was left to my own devices. Literally the day he left, it started. My neighbor texted me while I was away to let me know he left a gift for me on my front porch. In this exchange, he started using pet names like Sweetie and Cutie. I went home and he had left a hand-painted feeding dish for my cats in my mailbox. At this point, I wasn't that alarmed. He was just being nice, I thought. The next day, he sent me more texts with pet names, and I took the opportunity to make sure he knew I was not interested in anything romantic. He replied back with a rambling text about how all a person needs is friends, and he would like to be friends with me. After that, he would send me texts frequently, everything from inviting me fishing to telling me he left more gifts on my porch. I would often not reply, or I would tell him I'm busy. I didn't want to be rude, but also had no interest in any sort of relationship with him other than neighborly. One night, I got a text from the manager of the bar down the street, letting me know that if my neighbor knocked on my door, I shouldn't answer. She then told me that my neighbor had walked down to the bar with a hatchet and told the bartender he was hearing voices that got louder as he got closer to the bar. He threatened to kill someone with the hatchet if the voices didn't stop. They called the police, and the police took the hatchet from him, but made no arrest. The manager of the bar picked me up, and I spent the night at her house. After that, I tried to keep my distance even more, but things got even weirder. One day, I went out to my car to find a dead squirrel on my driveway. This squirrel had very clearly been run over and moved right in front of my driver's side door. I just stepped over it, got in the car, and left. When I returned home, the squirrel was gone. Shortly after, I received a text from my neighbor that said, "Someone or something put a dead squirrel in your driveway. Don't worry, I moved it for you." I felt like this was a weird way to word this, and I suspected he's the one who put the squirrel in my driveway. Another time, I walked out of my house to see he had placed an unspent shotgun shell on the bricks in his front yard. He came out and told me that it was to serve as a warning for anyone walking between our houses. For the next couple of months, I did my best to avoid him. He would text me, inviting me over, and I would come up with an excuse or just ignore him completely. I wanted to remain cordial since he was my neighbor, but it was getting very annoying and I was uncomfortable. He would text me as soon as I got home, telling me that he was watching me come and go from my house. Around Halloween, he crafted a large casket and wrote, "Here lies the last son of a bitch who played mind games, November 2012. What the hell? All this time still sending me texts. Eventually, I got fed up and I stopped responding completely. Less than 2 weeks after I stopped responding completely, he threw a 50-pound flower pot at my front door. You know those big concrete planters? Yeah, one of those. I called the police, who advised me to get a stalking no-contact order. A few days later, I was watching TV when a notification popped up that my neighbor was trying to cast a video to my screen. I declined it twice. I filed another report with the police. During this time, I started the process of getting a stalking no-contact order. I saw 3 different victim advocates who all told me different things. I went out of town for a conference, and during that time, someone had attempted to break into my house. I had an ADT security system, so while they didn't succeed, I was aware of the attempt. After the conference, I came home to the entire world shutting down because of COVID. I was trapped in my home 24/7 with my stalker neighbor next door. Luckily, court proceedings and protection orders didn't stop. Right before court, he sent me a text telling me he was sorry for what he had done, that he could tell when he saw me outside that he made me uncomfortable. Then he went on to tell me he can tell my hair has gotten longer and I look beautiful. I went to court and provided all of the evidence I had, the timeline of everything that had ever happened, the texts he'd sent me asking if I wanted a massage, the text I'd sent him telling him the way he was speaking to me was inappropriate, the text saying he knew he made me uncomfortable. I told the judge that I suspected he had attempted to break into my house while I was out of town. The kicker is, he didn't deny any of it. Actually, he told the judge that he took full accountability for everything. He said he was in recovery and was trying to turn over a new leaf. He didn't oppose the protection order at all. So in March 2020, I actually received the stalking no contact order. Everything was pretty quiet for a while. I mean, he did some weird stuff, but that's because he's a weird guy. It wasn't anything that made me fear for my safety. At this time, we found an unspent shotgun casing in my flower bed. It was consistent with the one he had previously used to send a warning. This occurred a couple of months after I started dating my boyfriend, and I suspect it was a warning to him. After this, and for a variety of reasons, my boyfriend moved in with me. He moved in pretty quickly, but everything turned out fine. We're still together, and as happy in our relationship as we can be. New Year's Eve 2021, I was awoken to yelling. I turned on my security cameras and got footage of him sticking his head out of his window and screaming obscenities at my bedroom window for about 7 minutes. It doesn't sound like a long time, but when your stalker is screaming threats and obscenities, 7 minutes is a long time. He called me a harlot. He said he was going to blow his house up with his gas line. I called the police, who responded. They told me that he never said my name, so they can't prove he was in violation of the protection order. The officer said, and I quote, "There's nothing illegal about yelling in your own house." They left without even speaking to him. All I could do at this point was do my best to avoid him. I parked on the street because my driveway is pretty close to his front porch. I got used to living with my curtains drawn. I always made sure my cameras were charged, all 5 of them. Yes, because of him, I spent over $1,000 on cameras. Every inch of my yard is covered. Since then, he's been seen by me and by other neighbors talking to people who aren't there, going outside and screaming nonsense. Things like, "I have Cheerios on my necklace," or "I'll put my p***s in your butt." I'm not even joking. This basically brings me to last week. In the morning, I was getting ready for the day when I heard screaming. "Someone is going to die over this sweatshirt." I turned on the cameras. I got footage of him walking around the alley behind my house, screaming, "Are you f***ing proud? How about I get my shotgun? I'll get everybody all fired up." I called the police. Once again, they didn't charge him with violation of the protection order. Instead, they gave him an ordinance violation for disturbing the peace. The police told me that it seems like he's off his medication again, and that was that. They left. Last night, I was awoken to hammering outside my window at 1 a.m. He was cutting down his privacy fence, horizontally. I called the police for a noise complaint, and they just told him to stop, and that was that. As I write this, he's outside continuing to horizontally cut down his privacy fence. That means the privacy fence only stands about 3 feet tall now. This was the one thing that made me feel relatively safe about hanging out in my backyard, and now that's gone. All of this is to say, I'm tired. I just want to live in a house where I can be sure that my neighbor won't try to kill me, where I can feel confident that he's not going to try and break in. My boyfriend and I are trying to buy a house to move, but it's difficult. I'm a PhD student, so I don't make much money. Renting won't work because I have 4 cats, plus my partner's cat and dog, although we have a place secured for them if necessary. And finding a place to rent with so many animals is difficult, if not impossible. I refuse to rehome them, so maybe it's partially my fault I'm stuck in this situation. My dad has agreed to co-sign for another mortgage, and I've gotten a second job. We should be able to save up enough money within a few months, but until then, I'm stuck. I just don't know what else to do. Update. I reached out to my neighbor's family and let them know that I fear for my life. I told them that there's a way they can get him institutionalized through the courthouse if he was refusing to seek mental health treatment. His family just said they would talk to him or have a discussion with him, etc., and that they were aware of the method to get him committed. This was almost 2 weeks ago at this point. Well, that pretty much backfired. Last night at approximately 10:30 p.m, he was yelling at my camera. He was saying a lot of nonsensical things, but at one point he said there was, quote, nothing wrong with his head or medication, and that I should, quote, try out a psych ward for myself. Of course, I called the police because I considered this to be a violation of the no contact order. The police came, and I got the worst officer. He told me that it wasn't stalking because he was talking to my camera, not to me. He didn't even go over and talk to my neighbor. He said he would send the report to the state's attorney's office. I actually do research in the courthouse, and while I was hesitant to bring this up in the course of my professional responsibilities, I finally bit the bullet and did it. I wanted to do everything the right way, go through the police and send it up the chain, but apparently the police make it impossible to do that. I spoke with the attorney today, and she was very upset at the way everything had been handled. The report had not been sent to their office as of noon today. She called and left a message for the officer for the report and is awaiting to hear back. She told me she'll call tomorrow with an update. At this point, I'll be continuing to advocate for myself directly to the attorney. I'll be sending every ounce of evidence, including pictures and videos, to the attorney with the hopes that we can file multiple charges of stalking against him. Of course, I understand that not everything may be prosecutable, but I know I have at least a few things which should stick. I'm really happy to say that I'm satisfied with the way the state's attorney's office is handling it at this point. I have gotten further with them in 1 day than I have with the police department in 18 months. That being said, I'm still looking for a new house. Update 2. I feel it's a weird situation because a lot has happened, but at the same time, not really much has happened on the court's end. Last time I updated, I ended after I had spoken to the attorney at the courthouse. I had sent them all of the evidence they needed, and to this day, I'm still waiting to hear any update at all from them. I know the attorney handling my case is swamped, so I've given them some room to breathe, but I'm back to a point where I may start pushing again. After the outburst where he screamed at my cameras that I needed to try out a psych ward for myself, my neighbor went on another tirade. He was screaming about how he could see a spirit in the moon or something, and was generally yelling nonsense at our camera. While it was all nonsense, it was very clear that he was speaking to our cameras. I called the police and they came and again told me that there was nothing that they could do because he was on his own property, blah blah blah. Then, while the police were there, he started up again and was screaming while standing on his picnic table about how he doesn't have to apologize to the police, to the FBI, to the university nearby, or anyone. As soon as the police shined their flashlights on him, he said, "I know, I'm sorry." So much for not needing to apologize, huh? He went on to say that everywhere he goes, he gets picked on. By us, by Walmart, by everyone. Apparently, everyone is just picking on him, and he's tired of it. So that's why he's screaming and standing on his picnic table. The police still didn't do anything, and told me that if they arrested him, it would be unconstitutional. Then they went on to tell me that they have colleagues who know my neighbor's family, and they are confident that my stalker neighbor isn't capable of murder. After that, things were kind of quiet for a while. Once again, there were weird things that happened, or instances of him staring at our house, or being an issue to other neighbors, but not to us so much. I can live with him just being weird. I'm not a difficult neighbor. As long as you're not putting dead squirrels in my driveway, screaming at me, or trying to break into my house, I don't have any complaints. That is until this week. 2 days ago, I got a notification that there was motion near the east side of my house, which is where my neighbor lives. I look at the cameras, and he's bending down doing something, and I didn't think anything of it at first. That is until he was there for a long time, and I kept getting notifications, so I look outside. Lo and behold, my neighbor has started 2 very, very small fires on his side of the property line. Why? I'm not sure. He set them and then walked away. My boyfriend and I considered calling the police, but the fires were so small and ended up going out on their own that we decided it wasn't worth it. All the police would do is show up and maybe give him an ordinance violation for illegal burning. At that time, I considered it a warning because I was due to testify in court against him later that week. Today, actually, nothing of substance came from court. He didn't show up, and he got a default fine of $250 for screaming in the back alley, which I described previously. After this, I spoke with a different non-stalker neighbor who asked me if stalker neighbor had been giving me issues lately. Apparently, stalker neighbor had been giving them issues by taking pictures of their house and doing other nonsense in the alley behind their backyard. Apparently, it was enough to cause alarm to the neighbors, but I don't know exactly what it was that he was doing behind their house. Another neighbor had also come to me and told me that the stalker neighbor had been antagonizing him on his bike by following him around and hitting his back tire. I also have him on video screaming at the neighbor's kids while they play on their bikes. Clearly, this is not an issue just with me anymore. One neighbor told me that her children didn't feel safe playing outside anymore. However, I'm the only one with a restraining order against him. Then that brings me to today, which today's incident is very, very much grounded in suspicion and speculation because I honestly have no idea what happened. But I find the entire thing very suspicious, so take this information with a grain of salt. A house behind ours caught fire and was engulfed in flames. The whole home is destroyed. Since it just happened today, there isn't any official ruling about how the fire started, but I've been told that it started on the porch and that it was an arson fire. How anyone knows it was an arson fire at this point is beyond me, and I really am not sure that that's the case. Small town gossip goes wild and may not be accurate, so I'm not quite jumping to conclusions yet. However, if it comes out officially that it was an arson, I'm going to be highly suspicious of my neighbor. I'm very hesitant to send the police the videos of my neighbor starting fires in between our houses just a couple of days before, because the police never take me seriously. I'm afraid of always reporting things and being treated as the boy who cried wolf. So I'll just keep it to myself for now. If they come out seeking tips or information from the public, then I'll send them the footage. But until then, I have no reason to believe that the police will do anything about the information I provide them. So that's where we are. I've gotten my finances in order to where I can get a mortgage, and I have a meeting with a mortgage lender next week. Hopefully, I'll be able to get the hell out of here before too long. I'm afraid of the guy burning down my house or doing something else ridiculous. Another strange incident happened. My neighbor was in his backyard having a fire in his fire pit and spraying down his whole yard with a hose. Not just his yard, but also his garage and shed. I was so paranoid about this, and I was just watching my cameras like a hawk. I was really afraid he was going to set my house on fire. Eventually, I got tired and decided to lay down to try and sleep. One of my front cameras had died, and while I knew I needed to get a battery into it, I thought I could wait until the morning. It was our doorbell camera, and while that covers a small part of the porch, it's not good for security. Usually, one of the other cameras I have in the front, 3 total cameras in the front that capture different parts of the porch, catch what people are standing on the porch, so I thought it was going to be fine. I was wrong. At around 1:30 a.m., someone pounded on our door, very obviously trying to wake us up. I was so scared someone was going to tell me my house was on fire. I jump up and look out the window, and no one is there. I'm totally freaked the hell out at this point and decided to call 911. We didn't go outside until they arrived, and then we noticed water and some other liquid on the porch, but nothing was caught on video. The police went over and told him to cut it out because they were well aware that it was him. They said he had a friend over with him, so it's possible it could have been his friend too. Thankfully, nothing else happened that night, but I still didn't sleep. I'm honestly pretty mad at myself that I didn't go change the battery, but the doorbell one, which is the one that died, is the least reliable anyway, because it barely even catches me leaving the house. And the other front one usually picks up whenever someone goes to the door. I just didn't want to go outside on my porch at midnight, and my boyfriend was already asleep. Regardless, it'll damn sure never happen again, because we added another camera to the blind spot. That's 6 cameras total. Another update. The prosecutors let me know that they will not be filing any charges. So, I've lost all faith that anyone will help me. Despite the videos, despite the witnesses, none of it matters. This comes after I got him on video threatening a woman down the street, and after there were other individuals who witnessed him threatening to kill me and other neighbors. I'm still waiting to get approval on my mortgage, but I'm supposed to close on November 18th. There's been a lot of uncertainty surrounding whether it will actually be approved because half my income is ineligible to be counted, so I've had to jump through a lot of hoops with co-signers, etc. But I'm supposed to find out tomorrow definitely if I can get the mortgage. If I don't get approved, I guess I'll just be lying about my animals and renting somewhere. Renting is just going to significantly impact my finances and make it so much harder on me in the long run, so I'm not pleased about it. Not only am I being pushed out of my home, it'd be hurting me financially, but he'll be just fine. This man will continue terrorizing the neighborhood while everyone around him suffers.